Welcome to Lesson 36. Congratulations, we're nearly at the end. We're going to take everything we've learned about JavaScript and apply it to something in ServiceNow called a Scripted REST API. This is a way for other systems to interact with ServiceNow where you have total control of what gets accepted, the payload, the format, how it's processed, and what gets returned as a response. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It's a way to transmit and exchange information over the internet with another system. A common use case that I cited before was, let's go get a stock price, or let's check the Uber status, or let's make a playlist in Spotify. There are lots of REST APIs out there. All you need are credentials, the endpoint, and understand what is the structure of what I need to present. So we're going to make one on ServiceNow that somebody could potentially interact with to extend the example we had before, where we're making a list of objects in an array of table record display values and sysids. So that's our end goal of what we're going to do. So before we get into that, I need to show you a few things about what REST APIs are and how they're constructed. You'll find them underneath Scripted REST APIs, and there they are under System Web Services, Scripted REST APIs. And when we create a new one, we're going to give this a name. So let's call this Record Finder. And the API will be record_finder. That's automatically assigned, but you can change that if you like. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We don't need to worry about any of the other fields. For the security, we'll use default ACLs, content negotiation. We don't need to worry about any of that. Let's go down here to the resources. This is where we're going to define specific functionality. We're going to use a new resource. So let's create that and give it a name. Get table records. It's going to be a get. Now we have different ways to interact with the system. Get says, hey ServiceNow, I would like to get information. I'm going to provide you with possibly some parameters, and we'll look at those in a second, and you're going to send me information. This is just what finance.yahoo.com does when you say I want to get a stock price. It has a public-facing web service, may or may not require authentication, and return some information to us. A post is when I want to create a new record. So if I send a payload, I want to create a new incident in ServiceNow, I could do that. And there are lots of existing REST APIs that we can do that. But we're not going to do a post. Put and patch are a way to update an existing record. I'm not going to get into the nuances of the differences of those today. And then obviously delete allows you to delete a record. So we're going to set up a method for users to get information from ServiceNow. The relative path is if I had multiple things on the record_finder API. I could have one that says list, for example. This would be the full name of my API at this point. It would be record_finder/list. I could have one that creates. I could have one that updates. But since I don't expect to have any more, I'm just going to leave that as /. Now down here is the scripted portion of my Scripted REST API. Note, it's enclosed in a function. We should be familiar with that. It has some parameters that it's automatically giving it to us, request and response, and those are fully documented on the doc site. And it also has request and response down here. That's how we interact with the Scripted REST API through those objects. Those are predefined. So avoid naming your variables request and response. And down here is where we have our code. Now, the first example I've got looks like this. I'm simply going to do a hello world. I'm going to return a value. And when I save that, I'm not going to run that in Script's background. This is now available as a web service. In fact, you know what? Let's give this a relative path name because I am going to have more than one. This is going to be Lesson 36 Script 1. Save that so I have a full path. This is the resource path to my API. So if I want to hit this, I would do https://instancename.servicenow.com/API/66238 blah, 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 blah. All right. and I should get a hello world. Now, we also have a very nice tool for interacting with this called the REST API Explorer. This allows you to test this out. If a third-party application wants to interact with ServiceNow, we can use the REST API Explorer to test it out, make sure the headers are right, even give them code snippets for Perl and Python and possibly some other ones. So by clicking that REST API Explorer, it takes me right to this endpoint. And it says, hey, Chuck, this is how you're going to interact with it. And there's some other options on here, which we'll get to in a bit. The different resources are listed here. I only have the one, so that's what I get. And down here is where I send this request. And it comes back and says, if I issue this GET to this endpoint with these default headers, I get a 200, which is okay. We like 200s. And this is your response. It took 186 milliseconds. You've got some other information in here, but down here is the response body. And this is what a third-party application would be interacting with. They send a request, they get a response, and I see result, hello world. Hooray, I've got a way of doing this. I mentioned code snippets up here. If I want a curl command, I could do that and click that, and it would say, here's how you would do this from the command line. Obviously, I would need to provide some credentials. If you want to do this in Python, here's some Python code to get you started. Same kind of thing. You can copy and paste and give this to your third-party developer and say, here you are. Have fun with it. Get started. You can now interact with ServiceNow. I'm on my way to creating a scripted REST API. Actually, I've already created a scripted REST API. So let's go to a little more complex. I'm going to leave the REST API Explorer up there because I'll come back and test it. I'm going to make a slightly more complex script. This time, I'll go back to my API definition and create a new resource. So that one is ls3601. Let's create another one. Get table records. I didn't actually get table records yet. This one is, I'm working up to getting the table records. That could be our lab exercise if you're not careful. This allows us to get some parameters. Now, I am going to paste this into the function. And notice all I did is add these 3 lines of code, really. The other one is just constructing a string. You should recognize that. Request is one of these input parameters that I've got for free. Request has an object in it called query params. Now, a query parameter is something you put in the URL to specify something to the REST API. In our case, we want to specify, is it active and what is the name? So I need to publish this. When I tell people about my API, I need to let them know that they have to put this on the URL somewhere. Question mark, which denotes the API from the parameters, active equals true, and name equals now. So if I save that with a new lesson 36 script 2, I'm going to submit that. My API becomes, it took me back to the other record. Let's go back in here. I'll rename this as script 2. It'll be easier to keep track of for me. Save that so I stay on the record. And I get back into the REST API Explorer. Didn't need the old one. Now I've got 2 methods in here. I've got my get table records and script 2. Here is where I add query parameters. This is where I can say, what was it? Active is true. And add another one. Name is now. As an example, I can pass this information. All this script is doing is echoing that back to me. So if you remember right, my script wasn't that fancy. It just said, go get the active value, go get the name value. I could have done these as request.queryparams.active, request.queryparams.name. I like to break them down like I did with my arrays and a list of objects so that I have a little less typing. In this case, it doesn't look like a little less typing, but it could be. So I'm using an object within an object to stop typing request all the time. Then create a string answer that just says, this is what I got back for these variables, and return answer. Let's try it out. I've specified my query parameters. Notice that it doesn't say anything on the URL. That's exactly the same except for the endpoint. Instead of SO1, it's now SO2. So I know my two different endpoints apart. I send that and I get another OK. We like OK. Here is the URL. The fully defined URL has the question mark in it. That's the nice thing about REST API Explorer. If I look at the curl command, it will be the same kind of thing. SO2, active equals true, name equals now. Okay, so we see that that URL is fully constructed, and the result is, hey, this is what I saw. What you sent me is being echoed back. Just testing out how can I pass information into a scripted REST API that becomes part of the function that I can process, and how can I return it out. Let's get a little more sophisticated now. Let's go on to the next example. Go back to this record, and while I'm at it, let's rename this script 1. There, now everything's in order. In the next example, I'm not going to use query parameters. I'm going to use path parameters, slightly different. So instead of instance.servicenow.com, blah, 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 question mark, it puts on a slash. It's part of the path. These are a little trickier, and I don't use them all that often, but you will see these in things like the table API for ServiceNow. So if I go back to creating a resource, let's call this script 3, now that we've got some order going on here, and lesson 36, script 3, do a get, copy and paste this over. How do I access those path parameters? Well, I use, instead of query params, I use path params. And I can pull out the table name and the ID. Note, there they are. It's got to be in this order. Here's an example. My app table and my ID. I could put in, if we wanted to rebuild that last example, this way, I could put in the table name and the limit. If I wanted to pass 2 parameters in via the path. I'm not a big fan of these because they look ambiguous, but you could do this. Let's check this out. It goes and constructs another, basically an echo statement to respond back and say, I got your parameters. Not a bad idea if you want to make sure that you're processing the path params or the query params in the other case successfully. Save that. Just a different way of getting information in. You could use potentially both. You could specify some parameters on the query line. You could specify some parameters with query parameters. You could specify some parameters with the path parameters. I haven't seen too many cases where they use both, but it's possible. Try this again, script 3, add our, oh, we don't use query parameters, so never mind that. We're using path parameters. And guess what? I don't see any path parameters because I didn't specify them in the path. I need to put them up here in the relative path to say curly brace, table name, slash curly brace, oh, let's do ID. Okay, when I put those in and save that, go back to the REST API Explorer on the same page, it now says, oh, I see those. You have to fill them out. It represents them as fields on this form. So what does that look like? Let's put in ALM asset 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are mandatory because they're part of the path. If you don't have them, you're not going to play this game very well. We do a send, and here is my URL, API 66238, blah, blah, blah. Table name and ID are part of the path. I get a 200 OK. I echo them back and say, this is what I got for my table name and ID. Works very, very well. So path parameters, you can use them. The curl command, same kind of thing. It's just specifying them on the URL that you see there. Another way of getting information in there. Let's take a look at one more. And this is going to be via a post. So if I were posting or putting or patching, I need to send that information via the body of the message. So we can do that by using the body parameters. So instead of creating a get this time, let's do a post. relative path, L36SO3, 4. We're on 4, I believe. Paste that in there. Yes, we're on 4. I put it in the header for you to help find it. Lesson 36, script 4. The way I access the body parameters is through request.body.data. Whatever the name is. Data is an object. It has name value pairs. So I am expecting, I'm going to copy these down just so I remember, name, ID, and color. And then I'll echo those out. So we're building this up very, very slowly. Save that. Oop, forgot a name. Script 4. Save that. Nothing else in the relative path. There's my script. And go down to the REST API Explorer. There's a lot more to know about scripted REST APIs, but I'm getting you the fundamentals so you understand how we can use some server-side script, JavaScript in an application and interact with the system. Building your own integration. Thought this would be a fun way to do that. So this is a post, which means it's going to require a request body. Now, in order to satisfy the API requirements, I'm going to say, was it name? I have the answer right here. Name, ID, and color. Name, let's just use mine because I have no imagination. ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, and color is, I'm feeling creative. Let's do an RGB value of something like that. I could have formatted this. Wouldn't have a problem if I had said, this is the body of this thing. If I wanted to make it a little easier, or copying and pasting it from somewhere else, maybe I've got this sample code off, testing it somewhere, do indentation, whatever you like. Make it easy on yourself, but provide a decent JSON, JavaScript object notation, JSON payload for this. And it's going to say, this is the body data. Send that. And you get a warning. It says, hey, you might be doing something that's going to affect the instance. That's fine. We're not actually doing anything, but you could be creating records with this. Here's my request body. Looks wonderful. Here's the status, the response. Okay. And it says, I see your name, ID, and color. Excuse me. If I wanted to retry this and say, maybe I forgot the color. Okay. What would it do? It would say, it's undefined. So down in my response body, you didn't give me a color, it's undefined. So I may want some error checking in my code to say, if it's undefined, let's use a default of white, gray, green, blue, whatever. So that's the 3 main methods of sending information to a scripted REST API. Query parameters, path parameters, and in the post, a body. But there's more. Hold on. We want a response back. So let's take a look at this script. Here I've got the same kind of thing. Name, ID, and color in a post. I'm sending in this information, and I want to give a custom response back, not just echo out a one-line result. I would like to send back an object of my own that has a status. It has an author. It has perhaps an object in it, okay, and some other properties. So I want to get that back so that whoever's asking this, maybe it's like a stock ticker. What's the price? What's the name of the company? What's this ticker symbol? What was yesterday's high? What was the weekly low? That kind of thing. I can send that back, and I do that via response.setBody, and I pass it my object. Not a stringified object, mind you. It will take care of that. There are other responses that I can set. If I want to change that 200, maybe I found an error. Hey, I don't have a record like that. You can send back a status of 404. Look at the response and request objects. There's a lot of great information in there on how to pull information out of the request and how to send rich information back in the response. I'm being very simple in this example, just as an illustration of what you can do. Then I'm going to return the response. So let's look at how that would work. Close that, go back, make one more API, open the record, and create another new resource called Script 5, Lesson 36, Script 5, This is going to be a post. I've forgotten that many times, so don't forget, if you're making a post, make a post. So again, get my 3 parameters just like before. These are body parameters, so I expect a request body to come in. Do some processing here. Assemble my answer object. Set that in the body of the response and return. That's good enough for me. And of course, I hit submit again. So I got to go back in the record. Sorry about that. Let's go down to the REST API Explorer. Comes up with script 5 is another post. I should have copy and pasted. Instead, I'll have to type that again. However, instead of doing raw, I could do a builder and say name Chuck. I could say ID. Yes. And notice that it's putting these all in quotes. So if I want an actual number, I would have to go and modify the raw values, which is easy enough. Color is blue. In raw, it doesn't have anything. But what I could do is say, you know what, that's close. You got me there. Thank you, field builder. But ID is actually going to be a number of 4567. Okay, that would be an integer value. Either way, you can do this. Just understand what it is you're getting. I prefer to pass in strings. They're less suspect to weird things happening on the internet, because remember, all you can pass back and forth is text. But that being said, you can always tell your scripted REST API, do you have a number? Remember that? Type of. If you don't have a number, let's do a parse int. Remember that? We talked about that. You could do that. Let's send this. It says you're doing a post. That could be volatile, dangerous. Here's my endpoint. Here's my payload. I got a 200. And here's my response. Notice that it is enclosed in a result object. So if my third-party application wants to do this, it's always going to be in result. There's no way to really take this out. It's going to be whatever object they get in, result dot status or result dot item dot name. Okay, so we've got a different way to do this. We've returned integers, we can return booleans. All of that stuff was set up for us in the script. Where that information comes from, obviously I'm hard coding it in the script. You could pull that out of a record. You could pull that out of a system property. You could generate that live and on the fly. So that is sending a response. And the basics about scripted REST APIs, passing information in and passing complex information out. Nothing in here should really catch you off guard other than the new scripted REST API constructs of creating a REST API and then creating the resources for that. And obviously we had some fun exploring the REST API Explorer. So with that, I am going to leave you with a couple of challenges to put this all together, everything we've learned to date in a scripted REST API. So join me for that, won't you? Thanks for watching.